Manisha, just
So,
to echo what Manisha said, I won't offer this up to anybody else or for your slides, Manisha, but during my slides, guys, come off mute, yell at me, ask a question, raise your hand. I don't feel like you can't interrupt me and have to put something in the chat. I'm all for an interruption or two. So feel free, Manisha. I won't, like I said, don't do that to Manisha unless she agrees. But feel free to interrupt me.
yeah, so Kirk and I, we know each other from, just kind of like the Indigenous in Tech and like this like larger mentoring initiative that we've been a part of called Program Earth. We do come from a space of like cybersecurity and AI, and I won't do his intros for him, but we got together because we do have this shared vision of like, having our hands-on experiences be something that's translated because we walk this path for the next generation, so that we can return, our knowledge, to be led by our elders to really birth something into this world that can keep this world in a place of healing, and kind of like the continuation for the next generations. So we're representing our companies here, and we're also representing Program Earth. A little bit about me, Taigwe Johar. I am a proud descendant of Taino and Santali peoples. I often say that like my existence is kind of the celebration of the resilience of like the coolie trade, and how we've kind of together finding that collaboration, finding our values. That is how people like me, are here today. Um, I have represented many different kind of companies in the industry like GitHub, Intel, recycling, clean tech firms, as well as like a stint where I supported the Californian government. But I like to also point out that I'm also a proud dropout from the university system, because, as Kirk will talk about, there is something just really intuitive of our identity, our lineage, and how we do systems thinking, how we think about security and sovereignty and data. Um, I also often kind of call myself an elder youth. And often you'll find me in like medicine circles, trying to come back in community through kind of remembering our ways with plant medicine. That's, it's been this really beautiful journey where, like, finding my way to the land has also been a way of like connecting with elders and being on the front lines for a lot of these mining campaigns, or reanimating our village and like kind of like that bottom corner with Auntie Kaiseke Tekina Airu, and even getting to like table at all of these events, whether it's like ACEs or ERG leadership conferences. So Taigwe Johar means both hello and thank you. So hello, and thank you for making this space to share both our hearts and our minds. And I will pass it off to Kirk.
Manisha, I also wanted to
No,
point out
you have
I'm after one of those tinctures. I want to know what the tincture what's on the tincture menu. So you'll have to tell us, how we can access your medicines. Guys, Shlongo, SJ, Mudo for being here. My name is Kirk Morrison. I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I am from the Muskogee Creek Nation. My ceremonial grounds is Tallahassee, Wakawaya, and my clan is Katsalgi. So those are all the kind of the things that ground me, and I will tell you guys, because I think this is important to to be honest and to kind of open up the floor in a way that makes me seem vulnerable or whatever. I was a reconnected native, right? I did not grow up traditional. I grew up knowing that I was Muskogee Creek, and as a resident of Northeast Oklahoma, everybody kind of knows about the five civilized tribes and the history of Oklahoma and how we all came to be here. Um, but the way that that happened for me is not traditional, right? Like my parents didn't grow up taking me out to the stomp dance grounds, out to the ceremonial grounds. I did all that work on my own, right? And so I just want to tell you guys that because I think it's important. Other people that are disconnected, there's plenty of ways we've been disconnected, right? There's been boarding schools. There's been, the entire governmental structure of the first part of the United States was designed to take our identity away from us. So we're all kind of victims of that
Thank you.
system. So I didn't grow up traditional, and so when I learned about my heritage more in college and things like that, I started reaching out and begging people to bring me out to ceremonial grounds, and finally that's happened. And so I'm really, really thankful that those people have allowed me that opportunity. And it's, something that's really, really important in my life. Um, I'm married. My wife, Jade, is an artist. She's an incredible person. And we actually just had twins, boy girl twins. And kind of along that disconnected, reconnected native piece, like my kids aren't going to know what it's like to be disconnected, right? My kids, they've already been out to the ceremonial grounds, even as babies in diapers, not able to participate. They're going to be there every single year. They're going to grow up out there. They're going to dance. They're going to sing. They're going to do all the things that I wished that I would have done it when I was a kid. So, I just feel like that is a bit of a reconnected native success story. And so I think that's important to share. Hobbies wise, I'm kind of all over the board. And as you'll see in the rest of the presentation, there is quite a bit of a duality to me as a person, kind of melding the things that are super, super old and then also super, super new that kind of makes me who I am, right? So I have a lot of new age hobbies like Web3 and obviously cybersecurity. I'm also an artist. I do Photoshop work and things like that. But then I also do a lot of old things like hunting and fighting and archery and things like that. So like I said, thank you guys for being here, giving us the opportunity to share with you kind of who we are, Manisha and I, and the goals that we have for how to utilize AI in protecting data sovereignty. So this is just a bit of an agenda. Tell you what we'll go over today. I'll talk about my journey into technology. We'll talk about why we as natives are specifically suited for cybersecurity roles. We'll talk a little bit about cybersecurity in general. And then I want to talk about the importance of tribally owned large language models, which you'll hear a lot throughout the presentation. We truncate that to LLMs. So when you hear us talking about LLMs, that's what a large language model is. And then Manisha will go ahead and talk about the large language models and their impact on the ground, in the physical world, right? And then why it's important for us to build our own tools and kind of be in control of our own data. And then she'll demo some examples of AI and then talk about kind of how you guys can get involved. So to get us started here, I think it's important to just kind of set the stage. We want to bring more natives into cybersecurity. This is a really, really important piece of what we're doing. But I think first of all, we want to define terms, right? We are talking about how to use AI to protect data sovereignty. So let's talk about what data sovereignty is first, right? It's the idea that a country or region, and I added this part, or a tribal nation has the right to manage and control their own data, regardless of where that data is stored or where that data originated. So when we're talking about things in the context of LLMs, I also need to define LLM, right? LLM is just your chat GBTs, your open AIs, all of these AI models that have been brought together in a large language model format. And I know that a lot of you guys have probably used them, ChatGPT or Bard or Gemini or Llama or all these things. They're all LLMs, right? And I think a lot of people think that we've been so exposed to LLMs that a lot of people think that AI equals LLM. But I just want to be really clear about the fact that an LLM is a type of AI, right? An LLM is a subset of AI there are many other types of AI models. Some of them are used for
Mm.
cybersecurity. Some of them are used for scientific applications. There's thousands and thousands of AI applications and engines out there. And LLM is it's basically a tool that scrapes the internet or scrapes human, whatever input, word input, and then learns from that input, right? Learns how to speak, learns how to formulate sentences, learns how people talk, and how to replicate that. So those are the two terms that I think are important for us to define. And then moving further, we want to talk about why, right? We want to talk about why it's important for us to be in the cybersecurity field and why we as Native Americans and members of sovereign nations, sovereign Native nations, are, specifically suited for cybersecurity. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. One of them is just a long history of defensive posture, right? We've been living, as you can see here, we've been living in walled cities for a long time, for a variety of different reasons. Um, Even at the beginning of the civilization in North America, right? There's been, or not North America, but the Americas in general, right? North and South America. The Olmec were some of the first civilizations to create a walled city, and a lot of that is, it's for physical security, and it's also to bring people together, right? And put boundaries and guidelines on our societies and our villages and our places that we live. So I don't want to talk about necessarily the protection there, but just the safety of our people has always been paramount to Native cultures. And so that's one of the reasons why we're suited for cybersecurity. We also have culturally embedded ability to pivot based on macro factors, right? So a lot of people think that the climate and the animal populations in both North and South America have been unchanged since humans arrived on this continent, this half of the world, 10,000 years ago. But that's really not been the case. There's been massive swings in animal population, in climate, and weather, and the places where certain groups have lived, right? We've constantly migrated around based on flora and fauna changes, and so it's something that's kind of embedded into us. I mean, there are certain cultures that would migrate, on the weekly, or migrate by seasons, depending on where the buffalo herds were, or where the best deer herds were, or where there was access to water. So being a really adaptable people also makes us adapted for cybersecurity, because I'll tell you guys, cybersecurity is one of the most complicated areas of IT, because it's got high risk and high ability for disaster, basically, like business continuity, factors. And so it's important for us to keep that in mind, but it's also something that we've been dealing with for a long, long time. And something that when Native individuals get into cybersecurity, I think they're, at least a little bit more at home than your typical entrant into that niche. The other thing is that we have is resilience built over generations, right? I think members of Native nations in the past are very resilient, very tough. They have a tough mindset and a spirit of determination in the face of adversity that I think a lot of other cultures don't have. And the interesting part here is I'm talking to all the ladies in the room. That resilience, that toughness, that determination is not reserved for males, right? A lot of warrior societies and a lot of societies, that are ancient cultures, have a emphasis on sort of the toughness of the men, or the warlike mentality of the men, right? We don't have that in a lot of Native American cultures. A lot of Native cultures and sovereign nations put a high emphasis on women, and women have a massive role. And a lot of these societies, including my tribe, the Muskogee Creek Nation, are both matrilineal and matriarchal, right? So this is not something that's reserved for just men. This resilience that's based over generations has a lot to do with the aunties and the grandmas, and a lot of these really, really strong female figures that have raised babies and taught those babies toughness and resilience, and being able to pivot and being able to adapt and overcome. And so we owe a lot to those women who have been really integral in tribal governments and tribal communities throughout the history of nations in North and South America. The next thing we have, and I know you guys probably heard this from the keynote speaker, I thought he spoke about this really, really intelligently, is that we're grounded in nature and the creator, right? We talked about duality. When Manisha and I are doing these things in cybersecurity, we're constantly dealing with some of the oldest technology in the world and some of the newest technology in the world, right? We have an ability to to root ourselves and ground ourselves in the earth and in our own relationships with our creator, which, by the way, there are over 530 federally recognized tribes. That's 530 separate pieces of culture, right? I mean, you guys know how it is. I'm speaking to the choir here, but every Native nation has its own set of principles, its own set of doctrines, its own set of spiritually important things that are important to us. So as we go throughout the world, it's important to know that as we're doing all of this new age stuff, we also need to be grounded in the things that make us us, right? I think I lost my slides here, but the next one was going to talk about the CIA triad. So the CIA triad, this is just a principle of cybersecurity. There's a lot of principles of cybersecurity, but the CIA triad is a big one, right? Like I said before, there are very complicated systems that we're dealing with in IT networks. You think about how a network can get very, very complicated really, really fast. I mean, if we just think about the networks that we're involved in, all of you guys are a part of a school network, right? An educator network. When you think about that, you guys are seeing some of the endpoints of that network. You're seeing laptops, you're seeing phones, you're seeing specialized endpoints, Internet of Things endpoints, your smart fridge, your smart printer, like all of these things are endpoints. And then, as you guys probably well know from having gone to the IT closet or whatever of your school, there's also servers. There's also, when you open up those closets, those IT guys, they have stuff connected to stuff, and it's very, very complicated. You have servers, you have routers, you have switches, all the things that that facilitate all this internet access and data access that we kind of take for granted as users of IT systems and not developers of IT systems. So kind of understanding that things get really, really complex. First principles are really important in cybersecurity, right? The CIA triad, principle of least privilege is another one that you'll hear common. And then also defense in depth. These are all cybersecurity frameworks, right? So getting into the framework of the CIA triad, confidentiality is obviously super self-explanatory. If you have data in your system, you don't want people to be accessing that data without permissions, and the administrator of that data, which is sort of another long topic. Who is responsible for this data? Who is responsible for tagging and organizing all these cultural assets that we have? That's a whole other area, but you don't want people accessing that stuff that aren't authorized to access it. And doing that involves having network visibility and knowing who's on your network and who's not. And if people are acquiring dwell time, which is a term that is used in cybersecurity to talk about if a threat actor is already into your network, and has visibility into the network, and the IT administrators don't know that they're in there, we call that dwell time. So sorry, I'll try to define terms as I go if I get into tech talk or lingo. But that's what confidentiality is. And then also integrity, right? We want to make sure that data is immutable, which is another buzzword, which just means it's unchangeable, unchanged, and not with the ability to be edited, right? So we want to keep the integrity of that data. And I think that's really important for Native cultures for a couple of reasons, but one of them is that we don't want our data changing, right? We don't want our traditions to be changing. We want that stuff to remain exactly the way it is. It's kind of it's sacred to us, right? even just a photo or a prayer or a piece of language technology or a piece of language learning resource. The stuff is sacred, right? The stuff is it's been unchanged for thousands of years, hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. And so for it to go into a digital application and then be changed is a travesty. And our ancestors don't want that, right? They want things to remain the way that we've been doing them for a long, long time. And so maintaining that cybersecurity integrity is just another way that we do that. And then we talk about availability, right? Um, Availability has kind of changed in the advent of LLMs. When we talk about large language models, it's really a really easy way for people to access that technology, or to access that data that they would have had to go search, right? If I'm looking, if we're thinking about an LLM that houses Creek Muskogee culture, right, and I'm looking for a word, I'm looking for the word for arrow, right? I would typically have to go into a dictionary and type in arrow. I'd have to find that word. I'd have to translate it myself based off the data that was in there. With an LLM, we can just type in what is the Creek Muskogee word for arrow, and boom, we're going to get an answer spit out. And so it increases the availability of the knowledge and the assets that are there. And it's the third piece of the CIA triad. So then I will try not to make this a pitch, right, for Darktrace, which is the company that I work for. But it is important to know kind of what's possible, right, and how AI is sort of changing the landscape of cybersecurity. Darktrace is a company that uses AI to protect systems. And we do that for a lot of different companies. We can do it for companies that are 10 employees or 10,000 employees. We can do it for all verticals, government and commercial and all types of organizations, because as you guys know, all types of organizations are a target for cybersecurity right now. It used to be in the past, when all the cybersecurity threat actors were doing everything manually, there were certain principles like, hey, this threat actor may want to go get information from a really successful bank, right, as a way to siphon money out of that bank's network and into their own crypto accounts or into their own bank accounts. That's a pretty common way that we can understand how threat actors would want to get access to a system. But now they're not doing all that stuff manually. They're using AI. The threat actors are using AI tools, just as us, as educators are using AI tools to make every attack is bespoke. Every attack is scripted. Every attack has, this generative AI layer that makes things difficult for the defenders, for the blue team. That's another lingo term. The blue team, right? The people that are responsible for defending the network. These AI tools make it 10 times harder to defend the network because all the threat actors are using these AI tools. So a company like Darktrace basically uses the AI for the blue team application instead of the red team application. The red team application is the threat actors. What we do is we identify patterns of life, right? We use anomaly-based detection to identify patterns of life. What's normal for me? Kirk gets on every morning and he sends these type of emails with this type of syntax, and he accesses these servers, and this is all normal for me. Manisha may get onto her device and she may do more stuff on mobile. She may do more stuff on laptop, but the Darktrace system learns all those patterns of life, what's normal for Kirk and what's normal for Manisha. And we use those patterns of life to then say, okay, we know what's normal. And then the AI is watching the data. As you guys know, this is another AI thing, but every action that you're taking has a log entry, right? And it's thousands and thousands of lines of log activity, for us to just go do something simple during our workday. So our AI is watching those log lines, right? And then as things start to deviate from what's normal, when they deviate from our established patterns of life, we identify that as anomalous, right? And therefore potentially malicious. And we start to look at those things and investigate those things and triage those things with the use of AI. So that's really what we're doing. It's really important to know that, like we talked about, we need to use those AI tools to defend our networks, because if we don't have visibility into our network and we're not able to defend our network, then we don't have integrity, we don't have immutability, we don't have confidentiality, we don't have availability. All these things that we need for business continuity and for education continuity are ruined, right? If we don't have access and secure networks for the places that house our data, right? Because data sovereignty is this, it's kind of this pie in the sky term, but it's housed somewhere, right? It's on a server, it's on a machine. Those assets live somewhere, and so those are the things that we're trying to protect. I also want to tell you, sorry, one thing, Manisha, go back one slide for me. This is pretty difficult to understand. I don't, this is kind of an eye chart with the AI loop, but essentially what we're doing here is we're trying to act like a human immune system, right? We're trying to, what Darktrace does is we, just like your white blood cells in your body would understand what's supposed to be in your body, what's supposed to be in your blood. They understand that. They've been there the entire time. They know what a white blood cell and a red blood cell look like. They know what all these proteins look like. All these things are that are in your blood that are supposed to be there. They can identify those. And then as things that aren't supposed to be there show up, those white blood cells know, okay, this is anomalous. We need to go fight this thing. We need to go remove this thing. So, sometimes cybersecurity can be thought about, in this new AI, this next gen is another term. This next gen framework for AI cybersecurity. It's sometimes helpful to use analogies, especially for people that are outside of the AI outside of the IT community, to be able to help people understand. I think the human immune system is a good one here to describe how Darktrace works. Sorry, Manisha, go ahead. And then let's get into the LLMs, right? We talked a little bit about what LLMs are and what they can do, but I think it's important to understand, like where they live. And we had talked a little bit about this before. I think that we need to enable our own tribal governments and our own, native nations to own our own assets, right? You can think about this like, let's frame it up like the Muskogee Creek Nation, right? My own nation, and I'm trying to do a project right now with them to set up a Muskogee Creek LLM, which I think will be incredible. But if we just use that one tribe as an example, there are Muskogee Creek pieces of art and pictures and language resources and all of these historical texts and photos of people's families and all of these things that create or not create, but like house and kind of encompass Creek culture. They're stored, right? They're stored somewhere, right? Whether it's in a, the most old school way that they can be stored is in a file cabinet in the basement of the, in Okmulgee, in the basement of the Muskogee Creek Nation building. And then the newest way that they can be stored is in a cloud instance in Azure or Google or Oracle, and on a server that's sitting somewhere in an Amazon warehouse. Because I think it's also important to talk about like what is cloud, right? A cloud is kind of a term that everybody throws around right now in IT to describe something that's not on premise, meaning like in a computer physically at that site. Cloud is just this term, but it's not in a cloud, right? It's in a warehouse somewhere. The AWS owns these massive warehouses that are just servers stacked up to the ceiling, all connected to power. And that is the cloud. Like the cloud is a building. So I want to like make that very clear. And I think it makes it easier for us to talk about where things live if we understand kind of the possibilities. So there is the cloud possibility, there's the on-prem possibility. I'm not sure whether it's important whether we have our Creek Muskogee LLM hosted on-prem on our own servers, in our own building, or in a cloud instance with a cloud partner that we trust, right? There's two ways to do it. I think both are good. Both have both have positives and negatives to them. But that's kind of the difference between the on-prem and the cloud piece. But I think either way, we need to build our own LLMs, right? We need to set up those servers, whether on-prem or in the cloud, to house that data, and then organize that data, right? I'm not a AI LLM builder developer. I'm sure Manisha would be able to talk to this better, but I know people here in the community that have the ability to do that and the skills to be able to do that. And so I'm trying to connect those people with the Muskogee Creek Nation. But the way that it would work is basically we would be able to take all of that information and house it in one place, in one data lake, and then that LLM would be able to go through and pick that stuff out for us, right, based on tags and the way that we organized, put that data into the system. So like, like I said, all those photos, all those language assets, all of that stuff, it would be really beautiful if, a Muskogee Creek Nation citizen who's not technologically savvy, right? Let's say it's my mom, right? My mom needs to go in and access a photo. Hey, I want to know if there's any photos of a Muskogee Creek family in the Coweta tribal town, right? My family is originally from Coweta tribal town, so my mom may be interested in going and trying to find a photo like that. That LLM is going to find that photo based off of a tag, off of the way that it was inputted, and that's beautiful, right? Because otherwise, my mom has to go down to the basement of Okmulgee and sift through library files until she finds that photo, right? So it's beautiful to be able to bring information to our citizens and the members of our native nations in a way that is easier and gives everybody that access to those accurate and easily accessible photos, language resources, cultural knowledge. We already talked about cloud on-prem. And then I think the last thing, or one of the last things to talk about, is I I am a salesperson, right? I'm a salesperson who has to frame up things in the language of the people that I'm selling to, right? So I think in this situation, I'm selling to tribal leaders, right? I'm selling to government officials. I'm trying to convince these people that we need our own LLMs, and one of the reasons why is because we can generate revenue off that. And I think anybody who's in sales and deals with C suites and leadership, when you start talking about money, their ears start perking up, right? And they start listening and they start realizing, okay, if this thing has a revenue generation capability, they're a lot more interested in it. Not saying that our tribal governments are, corrupt or are in any way, inept, because I don't think that's true. I'm just saying that when you do start talking about money, it puts things in their language because they're responsible for the tribe's revenue generation, right? And I think there's not a lot of cultural preservation projects out there that have the ability to generate revenue, and I think this is one of them that does, right? And there's a couple of different ways that could end up happening, that these LLMs could create, revenue and prosperity for the tribe. But one of them is through APIs, right? APIs is another kind of IT term that probably not a lot of people are familiar with, but APIs are something that have become fairly ubiquitous for all of us. Anytime a computer system is talking to another computer system, whether on-prem or in the cloud, that's done through an API, an application programming interface. It's just a way that computer systems share information, again, based off that network connection that they have, whether through the internet or networking and cabling and all this other stuff. We could charge for that, right? If we, the Muskogee Creek Nation, again, this is more broad than that, but I'm just trying to use a one single example. If the Muskogee Creek Nation has an LLM that houses all of our assets, all of our language, all of our cultural and sacred items, we could hypothetically, right, then charge somebody on the outside who's not native or not, a piece of or a part of our tribe. We could charge them for that API. Hey, if you want to access our, culture and our sacred ways of life, you need to pay us for that, right? Data is worth something nowadays, and so we're in a situation where we're kind of early and have the ability to sort of make our own way, or create a framework that would allow us to be the ones who are getting that revenue, and not anybody else, right? Using our culture and our sacred knowledge to create revenue that we're not seeing, right? If somebody's using our sacred knowledge, we want to be the ones who are receiving that money so we can then go put that into programs for our citizens. So um, again, I think the important piece here is that I think it's important for us to encourage our own tribal governments to learn about this stuff, right? They're not IT people either. They need to be, talked to like kids sometimes when we're talking about LLMs and we're talking about AI and IT in general. So I just want to encourage everybody to go and talk to your leaders about this. Say, hey, this is an opportunity for us to get ahead and for us to, take control our own destiny and kind of take the bull by the horns, as my dad would say, and make it something that we want it. So, Manisha, that's all I have, I think.
I appreciate you, Kirk. And I think a lot of what Kirk is saying, resonates. For some of us, we do hail from, federally recognized tribes. And for some of us, we also hail from unfederally recognized tribes. And the beauty of, kind of like this frontier in many ways is kind of here, the way our elder Kedu talked about earlier this morning. And a lot of where we are as people who are already embedded in this industry and then kind of acting like mentors or elder youth to kind of the generations ahead of us is how can we shift or flip the script here, right? So that these language models, these technologies, that when they're in that lens of like corporations, they are for profit. But, like Kirk was mentioning, they can be about cultural vitalization. And a lot of what we'll talk about next here is, how can we develop these language models in a way that can help us facilitate land and water rights, that recognition for our tribes, and, especially, someone had mentioned in the chat a little bit of like, well, how do we develop the support system, right, from like the K through 12 and to college and beyond? Well, I think the beauty of what, like the paths that Kirk and I have traveled is, yes, it is okay to be within these institutions and to like learn the technologies and know that the spirit of your ancestors are always walking with you, to call on them to lead you to the elders of your community, to listen, to, like there's a reason that we practice our ways the way that we do. It's tradition and it's also kinship. It's also that relationality so that we are good stewards of the land, of the water, of our animal relatives. And that is how, the future generations will sustain. So, today when we look at like LLMs, we might be using like ChatGPT or, some form of open AI model. And so often I think what we think is that the prompt engineering, like us typing in those prompts, is the extent of our access to AI. But the reality is that all of these models are built off of these like data lakes that in many ways do not include us. And if they do include us and our knowledge, it's in a way where we don't necessarily have the sovereignty of what that data is going to be used for. And that's, I think, part of the vision of Program Earth was like, how do we pass on the skill sets that we're learning in the industry to, our peers, to our elders, to our youth, in a way where they can take that and reclaim it. Have these use cases, whether it is revenue for your tribal councils, or if it's actually, again, like in that space where we can use it for empowerment, like the example we'll show a little bit later is around like legislation and how these LLMs can be helpful. Basically, we change the direction because our mind, our imagination, and our prayers are now part of the process. So part of like why we talk about having, whether it's like the networks or like the systems in our kind of ownership is because, again, I think there are a lot of good guests and good ally corporations out there. But when we make sure that the whole supply chain of what we're setting this up is kind of amongst trusted networks of like Native and Indigenous communities. The goal and the hope is that we avoid, certain events that have impacted our communities. Like, for example, when the National Institute of Health was working with a lot of tribes and, after the course of the project, ended up stating that they actually own all tribal data. That is kind of this frontier of AI that I think like our elder in the keynote like very clearly gave us something to heed, which is we can change the direction of extraction. And that depends on how much of this are we empowering ourselves to, develop that sovereignty in. And, the great aspect of this is that there are a lot of us who have been kind of working on these models. And in this scenario, one that we've developed is how can we use these language models to preserve our traditional ecological knowledge, but at the same time, use cybersecurity principles so that there's a level of encryption and ownership that, like, again, the data can't be changed, reflecting what Kirk had said earlier, that, it cannot be co-opted, where, like, governments just decide that like, oh, cool LLM, thanks for helping us learn how to fight, wildfires and flooding, and we'll just take this now. But this allows us to kind of have some weight. So like, for example, like, here is kind of how like Lepan Apache elders had illustrated why it's so important from like the grass all the way to the buffalo, like why these relationships are important in order for both like the reforestation and also like to, reduce wildfires. But these relationships and the weight attached to them, this is the data lake that we can create, and we can be responsible for making sure that like, yes, we can use this to impact things out when we have to talk to like governments and like legislation, but the model will show you, and what we hope that we can actually share as a syllabus for all the educators here, is a way that when we develop these, it's still protected so that we can keep our knowledge sovereign, and prevent kind of the risk of co-option. So in this scenario, we had used kind of yes, that is me. We were speaking at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, where a lot of the water rights were under threat to be taken away from Yurok, Hupa, and Karuk tribes, because the almond and wine industry was stating that if they took over the water rights, they could bring the state $4 to $6 billion of revenue. And they were even acting like them getting rid of wetlands was a, methane emissions win. Um, and, we use this language model to really impact out like the stories that elders were telling us that, how important the journey of the salmon is, not just to, like their tribes, but literally every path that the salmon crosses from those wetlands, where is the spawning ground of the salmon and the herring, all the way to the seeds that they're carrying, which germinate across the watersheds, actually need the salmon's carbon, like the degree of carbon that the salmon deposit into the land in order to germinate and then hold down the watersheds when there is flooding. And in turn, because these are indigenous plants that like have, been relying on this cycle of the salmon, they're also fire resilient. So we were able to quantify that. Sure, state, take your $4 to $6 billion a year from these industries, but you're going to be losing $10 to $11 billion each year as well. Are you game for that? And again, it's, as Kirk mentioned, like, we don't like, like all of our animal relatives, all of the streams, all of the mountains are sacred to us. But we are living in a time where these institutions, these governments, these companies, the only thing that is sacred to them is money. And if that is the case, then it's, for us to fight for our people's sovereignty, our relative sovereignty, it's time for us to reclaim these tools and flip the script. And it is possible. This has been a beautiful journey where, like we worked on these projects, both with the youth who have been building like the language models and the security principles, but, getting to bring back the joy, right? Like oftentimes we think about struggle as like this thing that we have to be in resilience in, but it's actually a key to our joy. It's been so beautiful the past year where we put in almost 2 million acres into our elders' hands, where like, we were able to build a Tule canoe in like the, Tomaliwa Bay with our coastal Miwok elders, getting to hear the bellows of the Tule elk, knowing that, the ranches aren't going to continue to dump all of these pesticides that are like removing kind of their grazing land. This, parking lot you see at the bottom right, where we're going to bring back the Strawberry Creek for, the salmon to go back to their pathways, preventing kind of like the uranium dumping that's been happening at one of like the biggest waste sites for our mountain Ute elders in White Mesa. Like there is so much potential with, the way that technology can actually accelerate our advocacy. And if we are responsible for how it's architected and how it's being used responsibly, that could be the bridge, again, of our storytelling being powerful in a way where these institutions have, in many ways, tried to silence our voices. I'm going to check the chat really quickly. Oh, that's so beautiful. Yes, Tanya, like there's a lot of kind of wonderful like hearings that are actually coming up at the end of this month. So I'm happy to share those, and also a newsletter for folks to follow along the journey of elders. I can actually play some videos too of like just how great it's been to be on the undammed Klamath, where the kids get to be on the Yurok canoes again, getting to actually eat the salmon in traditional ways. This is not going down silent. That's what they want. This is like the lithium mining that's actually about to take place in Arizona. That disrupts the healing springs. And so I think a lot of times, when we're in this place of resilience, what's happened is there's so many things to try to fight against at the same time. But I think that's the possibility of using LLMs and technology, is that even if like we, like I think a lot of times, especially in advocacy, they kind of expect that because we're smaller, that our voices aren't going to be heard in the same way, but technology is a way that we can amplify ourselves. We can be in many places at the same time. So hopefully that already gives you an idea of why building our tools are really important. But also kind of throwing it back to Kirk, and you might recognize this as like the footprints that were, found of like Zuni peoples and Hopi peoples, and how essentially like people in the beginning were trying to say, oh, okay, hopefully that stopped the videos. Our people are ever present. And a lot of times what happens in this sort of like knowledge building, right? So like AI is one frontier, but that frontier was started when our oral storytelling was replaced by like writing and like scribes and these books, and how those were held to be like more authoritative than like what our elders had been telling us for millennia. Even in archaeology, right? Like there's this idea of like who's brushing apart and figuring out, like what was the story. And in this place of using that cybersecurity, maybe potentially that blockchain within these LLMs, we can actually take a more empowered stance of not only, preserving this knowledge, but ensuring that it's not erased, ensuring that it's not, changed, because in a lot of the threads, across Indigenous communities, the integrity of like us telling you what is, the land that we are tied to, that we are stewarding, that we care for, that is always something being challenged. Our very existence is always being challenged through new frontiers of data, of knowledge. And this is a place where maybe we can flip that tide. Yes, Michael Running Wolf is doing some really great work on data sovereignty and language revitalization. And I think some really interesting legislature as well, so that like as they release these APIs, it's used responsibly. And those are very much like the models, like the reason that we're hoping to, work on this language model around traditional ecological knowledge is because in many ways it aligns with, the larger timeline. I think for many of us, whether it's like the seventh generation prophecy, the seventh generation fire prophecy, or the 24th generation prophecy by Taínos, there's this change of world that our ancestors almost kind of foretold, that they were, we were being buried as seeds, and this knowledge and this timing where, Earth is being very loud, that extraction is not the system that's going to hold anymore. And so it's been really wonderful to work on the ground with these like language models to kind of increase the conservation of land, but it's all connected. So if you're feel called to, this scenario, this kind of industry as both an educator or a practitioner, there's a reason. There is a lot of revitalization that is part of a lot of the prophecies many of our cultures hold. I think what we're hoping to, like depart to you today is that the future does look really bright when we get to stand in that power and in that imagination. In just 2 years, we, did a conservation of 2 million, where we were able to return that land back to both federally and unfederally recognized tribes. We're looking at almost 6xing that amount of land because of, the success cases of using this LLM. What we're going to kind of present to you next is like some of the practices that we use to, maintain our projects. And also, this is great if like you are an educator who is like wondering where to send your kids who are going to like college or getting ready for like the job search. We actually will pair them on these projects, and these are kind of all of the tribes that we will be working with in the next year. So definitely something to, have climate joy, climate optimism, but also know that we are literally our ancestors' wildest dreams because we are the prophecies that they foretold. So how do we make sure we protect those prophecies though? And Creator knows that, like, I mean, I realized that you can't control all the things, right? But cybersecurity principles like this is just a way for us to work in that larger flow. So some of the principles, yes, yes. Patty brings up a great point, and I think a lot of like the ethics, the data privacy, the bias is very true for like the language models that, like, let's be real. So being at GitHub, like I get to watch AI models like all across these different industries, and it looks like there's many differentiated models. They're all just like layered on top of OpenAI's Turbo 3.5 model, and then whatever like, like iteration of it becomes. And like what could be greater than like having to practice with kind of these existing models is to build our own. And so a lot of like the syllabus that we focus on in order to build our own is like, we really think critically about hosting, right? The fact that like a lot of our like federally recognized tribes, for example, do have IT departments. They do have server spaces. And that is something that we should be leveraging, for like personal projects, maybe like your school's project. We definitely do at Program Earth. And then, having these like partnerships with good guests, like partners like, like Dark Trace, for example, is really good if like on top of that hosting, you want to do certain like testing just to make sure that there's, a lot of that sort of immune system workflow for like how we're protecting these actual physical spaces that our tribes could actually be hosting. And then there's the actual like app development and like the data. Um, a lot of people are, using things like Postgres and like the Web 2 principles, but like part of where, we could be looking at, again, reclaiming use cases of even Web3 is things like blockchain and holochain, because there's, again, that sort of ledger system that creates an end-to-end encryption that, again, people cannot necessarily change what we have put into the LLM, but also in this model, we created better protection for privacy when it came to identities. So like a lot of the campaigns that we're working on, which you can ask me more questions around at the end in the Q&A, are hypersensitive, right? We're talking about mining. We're talking about reactors. A lot of times people aren't able to put their voice out there because of like identity. And encrypting that identity is so important. So making sure that we have some architecture that backs that up. Today, what we'll be demoing is like within the actual app development itself. It's like, as you are doing security testing, how are you resolving that? How can you also use AI in development to increase that security? Because while existing models that are under OpenAI may not understand, like our values, like our traditional ecological knowledge, our cultural references, they are really good in terms of making it, making just like the supply chain of like your software in a really good quality. So without much, I'm happy to like, so like, for example, one way that we use blockchain is for a lot of the advocacy, they want to see the jurisdiction of like a lot of the allies to the tribes. They're almost like, hey, did you really have people, constituents from this? Like, so when it came to protect Hakamwe with Hualapai and Hualapai Nation, you had a lot of Phoenix residents speaking out. So we had to basically validate that they were constituents in the area, but through this blockchain, we were able to validate, but they couldn't triangulate the person. So people could speak out without, fear of identification, but validate that their voice ought to be counted. So this is just kind of one example of something that we cover. And so this is, so like definitely urge you, like, if you aren't already leveraging, like maybe like your specific tribe's resources around like their IT departments for server space, maybe potentially have like intertribal conversations about this. TribalNet is also a really great conference where a lot of IT leaders, across different tribes will meet to kind of talk about what are their strategies of engagement. So definitely, be part of those conversations. Now we're going to get to a demo part of this, of like what it looks like to be leveraging some of this technology in your classroom. But what I will, direct us to towards the end of this is just like recordings that exist, but also the fact that like, we're always happy to put these on for your classroom or like create a continuation program. So just give me 1 second to pull up our demo environment. So, and then I don't know, Kirk, if you want to use this moment to like quickly answer Gloria's question. I'm not able to see it, but happy to.
Yeah, I was just gonna come off. Gloria, I think what you're asking is really important because I think what I'm reading from your question
Kurt,
is
can you repeat the question for us?
yes. The question that she asked is, I'm curious to know how AI will present the various indigenous native language in classroom instructional dialects. She's worried that amongst the Dene Nation, we're Athabascan language speakers, and we do a variety of dialects on the reservation in New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. There are times when the local communities will correct the instructor of how they pronounce certain words, and I know that this is really common for not only the Dene Nation but all of the rest of the nations. I mean, something that happens all the time, right? And then also, it's important to acknowledge like a lot of answers can be right at the same time, right? Like there can be a lot of things that can be right simultaneously. And I think from my perspective, Gloria, what's important here is to create human learning exceptions within the machine AI frameworks and engines that we set up, right? AI is, there's kind of two schools of AI. It's either supervised or unsupervised, and an unsupervised AI system will learn, right, and will change. And whereas a supervised system is a little bit more solid, a little bit more, not as dynamic. But it's important to know that we have the ability to customize these models if we build them ourselves. That's another reason why it's important to build them ourselves, because then we maintain the ability to change things and do things as we want to. But I think that in this situation, it's important for us to have those learning exceptions and for us to be able to teach the system, like, hey, we our original tag, our original input said this, but we want to amend that based on regionality, or based on band, or based on tribal affiliation, or location, or whatever. And as things start to become more complicated, and you can even have sometimes logical branches where in New Mexico it's pronounced like this, in Arizona it's pronounced like this. We now have a branch in our LLM, in our AI model, and that stuff gets really hard to keep track of from a human perspective. But AI is really, really good at keeping track of that stuff. So I hope that answered your question, Gloria, and you can tell me if it didn't. But I think it's really important to maintain our own ownership of those LLMs so that we can do exactly what you're talking about.
And it can be like, something that we also support with like hardware, right? Where like we're doing this right now on the ground where um elders can just speak into like a speech to text, and then that goes into the language model. And so there's a lot of like hardware devices that can so like when someone's correcting the pronunciation, that can be recorded. It can be like labeled in terms of what logic branch exception it is, and then stored into basically another segmentation of like the larger umbrella of like the language model that you might be working on. I might be taking us on like a little bit of a tangent here. So part of that like cybersecurity, does start with like our code, where again, there's a lot of like I think this is like the place where we get to use that discernment. I think like a lot of examples that Kirk and I have talked about, it's like how do we maintain our own models or create our own models? Um, a lot of the cybersecurity outside of like the hosting and like the encryption, the scanning and the testing, that's actually something that we can use existing tools for. So if you are building like your applications on open source, the nice thing is, again, not a pitch for GitHub, but does do a really good job of this, is like making sure you have visibility for your security scanning. So what we do for like the cohorts that we, facilitate these workshops for is we'll populate like a sandbox in this repo. So they have that really like hands-on exposure to like probably the tools that they're going to use in their next job. And then that ability to walk through it one-on-one in a very like storytelling way, where one, they can see how, tools are used to like, create alerts. So whether that's like potentially some injections or forgery, like all of these are really important because as we embark on creating our own tools, there's a reason we have a history of resilience. And that's because, there are actors out there that are malicious. And these sorts of tools are really great that like, as we're figuring out our LLMs, we can be scanning it. What we also teach within each, so like as you have like these alerts, like one, how to even identify the alerts, but we also teach folks how to use existing LLMs for just like the prompt engineering. Because it's kind of like how when Google first came about, there was like a whole class on how do you even just Google things. And that's what a lot of, using AI for security is going to be like too. What in kind of the coursework, what we do is we create something like a code space so that like setting up, oh, let's try that again. So setting up can be almost anywhere. It doesn't have to use the same compute, so that it's not like a barrier depending on where you're coming in from, right? So like whether you're using like Starlink or fiber and you're on a PC, it'll set up the environment in a way that doesn't run up too much space on your computer. So there's kind of a lot to think about as we're making this accessible for our kids. And so, we could use Copilot. I know that that's like a paid AI though. So I'm going to show this example on how you could even use it in ChatGPT, in order to like, take a security alert and like how you would just put it in to like just something that's free. So the nice thing about when we work in open source is that like that file can be seen. So we'll just say something like, we'll take the file link, and sorry, I'm just seeing all the chat as well. So right now, like there's almost like, so the examples that we've gone through is more of like this sort of shared like LLM across different tribes. So they all own like their segmentation of the traditional ecological knowledge of the relationships amongst keystone species over like the lands that they steward. But that's what Program Earth is as a larger project, is like an LLM where different tribes are kind of feeding into like different logic branches of their land. And so in ChatGPT, you could easily just go and just say like, like take the prompt engineering examples that like are said here, and just say like refactor lines 256.
We're in real SE territory now, folks. This is the part of the presentation, Manisha, when I usually tell people they've reached my technical limits.
You and I, we are that SEAE team. So there's a lot of AI tools that each company is gonna try to sell your school for doing the same thing, but I just wanted to like show you what it looks like in a free way. Because yes, GitHub does have our own, that like GitHub is where like it would be inside the actual development environment, but in this scenario, we actually do also teach people like how they can do it for free, how then they would take everything that was said and input and then put it back into the said file. So that it might have gone really, I have a tendency to go like really in the weeds, but just wanted to give you all more of like a preview of like how you can like take this back to your classrooms. Thank you for the time check. Because the other aspect of this is what we'll leave behind, just to be really cognizant that we can't go through like 10 of our workshops in this moment, is we'll leave behind this resource. It is a public resource of like all of these sessions together actually string into like how you can build like LLMs based on the model that we've already used on the ground. If you go inside these, there are like whole like kind of like hour-long videos that you can always feel free to like share with your classrooms. But also, like if you're more like formally interested to like send kids who are going off to college into like a 12-week immersive that can be practical. There is a step-by-step guidance in building the LLM, but like more so across all the workshops. But if folks want to, we actually build that 12-week program as well. So like there's a spring cohort, there's a fall cohort that we're happy to, share. It is 100% free. All of our workshops are led by, mentors across tech who are, Indigenous or people of color. And it's about like 4.5, 5 hours per week of just like hands-on experience, that teaching that we do. It can be done virtual. We've really acclimated all the tools so that it can be on pretty much any bandwidth or broadband in a really easy way. And then for a lot of our fellows who are usually using this as a step before like they go to their next job, we do have an 88% landing rate within the first 3 months after the program. Feel free to like connect with us on LinkedIn. And I'll also put in just like the website into the chat for if, the resources are useful. You can always get to our overall syllabus that I showed that has the step-by-step of all of the workshops. If you go to the syllabus here, and then you'll be able to like access all of our recordings, which basically builds up the model, the security model that we talked about today, but from like each workshop. But if you want that like guided, where like we're also kind of facilitating it, there's a spring cohort and a a fall cohort, and if you email that email, we're happy to like also figure out how to do it for like like if there's any ad hoc workshops for your program as well. But yeah, hoping that like that gives us some time to like maybe cut the recording, and happy to ask and answer a lot of like real-time questions. Kirk and I will also put our personal LinkedIns in if you want to reach out to us one-on-one as well.
Yeah, I'll